Hello and welcome to Dialogue. The work has shifted from search and rescue to resettlement and reconstruction in Dingri County in southwest China's Xizang autonomous region after a magnitude 6.8 earthquake hit the region on Tuesday. So what is the situation now on the ground? What are the major challenges to save lives and keep people safe in these high altitude areas? And how are the central and the local governments helping to resettle the victims? Join us for our discussion today, live from Beijing. I'm Xu. Well, joining me today are Zheng Songwu, CGTN reporter in Xigaze, and Xuanmei, director of the State Key Laboratory of Geohazard Prevention and Geoenvironment Protection of Chengdu University of Technology, Stephen Hicks, seismologist from University College London, Noel McDermott, founder and CEO of Mental Health Works, and Wu Changhua, chair of the Governing Council of Asia Pacific Water Forum. Welcome to Dialogue. Well, first we will talk to our reporter on the ground, Zheng Songwu. Songwu, welcome to the show. So, by the time of this interview, it's been about 58 hours since the earthquake struck this region, the Dingri County in Xizang. We know that the rescue work has been shifted to resettlement, recovery. So tell us what's going on right now about the work in the region where you are.
Well, thanks, Chengdu. Yeah, as you said earlier, the focus of the relief efforts following the earthquake has shifted to relocating affected people as well as post-disaster reconstruction, and also, but that doesn't mean that officials will stop searching and rescuing those who are still trapped. They will continue to make every effort to search and rescue those who are still trapped. And they will also provide a full medical treatment for the people who are injured and address heating needs during the winter nights, because now it's freezing cold, it's winter, and the altitude of the affected areas is about or over 5,000 meters above sea level. So it's very cold in overnight, and efforts will also be made to prevent secondary disasters and accelerate disaster assessment and post-earthquake building. And also a total of 337 injured individuals have been treated in different hospitals, both in Dingri County and Xigaze City, following the earthquake. And over these 246 have been discharged after receiving good treatment, while 91 still remain in the hospital.
Mm-hmm. Well, so what about those survivors, whose homes have been destroyed by the earthquake, and how they are being taken care of? Behind you, I see the tents and probably some makeshift homes for them. And then, as you said, it's winter, freezing cold. How about the challenges in basically conducting those work?
Well, actually, according to the officials today, 224 temporary shelters have been set and housing over 47 people. By the way, these shelters were built just in or near the safe places in the affected villages. And also, as you said that behind me, there are 18 temporary shelters, and we can see a lot of relief items, including noodles, rice, oil, everything they need, and also over 20,000 relief items allocated by the central government, including warm clothing, stoves, and quilts. Winter clothing arrived yesterday at the affected area, the epicenter. And also the Ministry of Finance as well as the Ministry of Emergency Management have urgently allocated 100 million yuan to support the rescue operations. So everything now seems going smoothly, and there's not big challenging, and everything will be okay.
Well, last question, before you leave. You talk to the local people who are affected by the earthquake. Obviously, they are, being through this very difficult time, very challenging time. With the arrival of those relief, goods, and also the workers from the government, from NGOs, from private companies, do you see a sign of relief now? They are being taken care of.
Oh yes, actually we in these 2 days we visited many villages in the three most affected townships, like the Changshu townships and Quluo townships, as well as Tuoguo townships. And we talked to a lot of people. They told us that they were really happy with those help from the rescue workers, as well as the help from the central government, including, as you said, the relief items or relief materials like the warm clothing, water, food, everything that they need, and also the heating needs.
Oh yes, the cold weather. Well, thank you, Songwu. Take good care of yourself too. Well, some of the rescue efforts that have been taking place, as Songwu said, many high altitude areas. So we also have here and Professor Xuanmei. Professor Fan, in those regions, high altitudes, more than 5,000 meters, before the sea levels. So in such a region, mountainous region, and also these high altitudes, what are the primary concerns probably for rescue efforts?
I think for the rescue efforts, like you mentioned, the high altitude regions actually bring a lot of challenges for the rescue personnel, because people may have altitude sickness. So the rescue team need to adjust themselves to the high altitude. And also the quite special terrain there also putting challenges there, in my perspective, because of this terrain, people may not, the transportation and accessibility of the region is not that good. So bring heavy machinery and equipment to the region for rescue is pretty challenging compared to, other easy reach regions. And thirdly, I think also due to the high altitude, the oxygen deficiency is quite serious problem. So apart from bringing heavy machine, carrying oxygen supplementation equipment is also very important to undergo altitude training to minimize the risk of altitude sickness. And also, we need to pay attention to the like post-earthquake disasters. Well, based on our estimation, landslides are not so serious problem in the region, but we still need to pay attention due to aftershocks. There are many aftershocks in the field now, and also later on, when the temperature rising, it may cause, the glacier, because we found quite some glaciers in the earthquake, glacier lakes in the earthquake affected area. So due to the rising temperature and snow melting later on after the earthquake, the region may facing the problem of glacier lake outburst floods and ice rock avalanche, these kind of problems. So the rescue team, in my perspective, should avoid these high risk areas and should pay attention to the monitoring of slopes stability and landslides, this kind of problem.
It's like a more secondary hazard there. So Stephen, from your point of view, how do you look at those challenges in such a region? And we know that the earthquake is about like 60 kilometers from not that far from the highest mountain, Himalaya there. So obviously it's a very remote region. What are the challenges do you see?
Yeah, I think probably from my point of view, I think landslides are one of the most important secondary impacts after a large earthquake, particularly in mountainous regions. I guess it sort of helps that this region is a sort of general, it's very high altitude, but it's generally a high plateau. So there's not too many sort of steep valleys like other parts of of China. Other impacts can also be what we call liquefaction. So this is where the ground shaking from an earthquake actually shakes up the ground and causes sort of the liquid, any groundwater in the ground to sort of move around, and that can sort of destabilize any buildings that are built on top of such sediments. So that can also be another impact, but certainly the level of ground shaking during the actual earthquake itself was very, very high. It was sort of level 9 out of 10 on a common sort of international scale. So it's very, very strong shaking.
Very strong shaking, and of course, all the more important for the speedy rescue work there. Changhua, we know if you look at this, numbers available for us on January 9th, it means today, Beijing time, over 500 affected residents have been relocated to 187. Resettlement sites, 3,700 tents being set up. And communications, roads, electricity have been fundamentally restored in the region. How do you look at this so far? I mean, 3 days, the recovery, the rescue efforts, search and rescue efforts, and recovery efforts, resettlement efforts here?
Yeah, first of all, I do want to, send my condolences to the losses of lives of those families in that region due to the earth disaster. If you look at the response, and I think it's fair to say it's a very impressive deployment of the emergency response and the management system. And, shortly after the occurrence of the earthquake, and the emergency response system being pretty much mobilized from the highest level. Of course, the top leadership started paying really, close attention to that, providing very clear guidance in terms of priority to search, rescue, people and suffering this disaster. And we have a vice premier literally sent on site overseeing the whole process of the rescuing, emergency response process there as well. Then if you look at all the resources mobilized in terms of money, materials, equipment, machinery, everything, just imagining, yes, probably they are more standardized sort of emergency response and management deployment, the system deployment, but you have to put that against the backdrop as we're discussing here today in terms of the extreme weather events there. It's the winter freezing cold temperature, it could be 18 degrees, Celsius below zero at night. And of course, it's pretty much a high altitude. About a month ago, I happened to be so closer to that area. So I experienced personally how challenging it could be to your health, literally. And but somehow the government so far has managed to really put mobilize all the resources possible in terms of people, equipment, the system, and putting together an impressive rescue plan. As you mentioned early on, and now it's the third day already. So the current stage is already shifted from search rescue and more towards resettlement, recovery, as well as rebuild.
Well, Changhua, based on your understanding, of course, in this region, as well, our reporter told us, basically 3 townships there, several villages, obviously, most affected by the earthquake. What we have known the numbers in terms of like 200 million from the central government has already been earmarked. In addition, 80 million from the finance ministry also being earmarked basically for the recovery, resettlement, reconstruction of this region. So I would say, based on what happened in 2008, the strong earthquake, I think China has, people say, basically built such a well-functioning mechanism in response to disasters like this.
Pretty much so. And I think now we officially have the Ministry of Emergency Response and Management. So we built up this governance mechanism system as well as the deploy system actually together in a very standardized, aligned with the international standards as well, to make sure. And on one side, we need to prevent, and we need to detect, observe, analyze, monitoring, and forecasting disasters as early as possible in order to prevent losses and the damages there. But in the meantime, when disaster occurs, we do have the standardized, mechanism system actually to deploy, to mobilize resources, including financial resources, particularly from national level, which is really, really critical. In this case, national government definitely has stepped in, and by providing the financial resources, public financing in particular, besides, of course, there are some companies and donations from the society chipping in to support the process in order to mobilize as much resources as possible in order to make sure, we will be able to respond in a very timely manner. And as we talked about here today, now it's within the 72 hours. Usually this is the most critical time in order to search, rescue, and make sure to minimize losses and damages as much as possible. But in the meantime, of course, now the current stage, we're moving into the next stage in terms of resettlement, recovery, rebuild, which is not easy at all in that particular environment, pretty fierce actually, environment there. But somehow, hopefully, more people, more resources will be mobilized to continue this effort.
Yes. Well, Stephen, if you look at this, the happening of course, of this earthquake, what geological factors do you think, has probably contributed to this, the severity of this earthquake? Yeah,
so Earth's sort of outer crust is divided into these tectonic plates. And these plates collide with each other in different ways. And we've actually got one plate to the south of the area, that's the Indian plate, so essentially the Indian subcontinent. And then we also have a big plate to the north. This is called the Eurasian plate, so it includes Europe, Asia, including China, of course. And so the collision point between those two plates is really the front of the Himalayan mountains. And this collision is happening at a rate of about 20 millimeters per year. So it's quite slow. It's about the rate at which your fingernails grow. But sort of that collision is happening over many, many thousands of years, and many of these faults do not cause an earthquake for a long time. So that that sort of collision is then accommodated or released by these big magnitude 7+ earthquakes. But in this particular case, this is quite a different earthquake to other earthquakes elsewhere in China, which have involved sort of what we call strike slip or horizontal motion along a fault. Here we've got what's called a normal faulting earthquake, where we have one sort of block across a fault sinking and the other one relatively moving up. So this is called a normal fault. And this is because the whole sort of plateau in the area is sort of extending. It can't support its weight anymore. So we have so this particular earthquake is a manifestation of this crust, which has become over thickened, that can't support its weight anymore. But it's definitely one of the largest earthquakes of this particular mechanism, of this particular type in the area. So looking back through historical catalogues, I can't see many other earthquakes of this magnitude in this part of the plateau. So it's quite sort of unprecedented, but these earthquakes can take sort of thousands of years to really build up to.
Mm-hmm. Well, Stephen, we have basically counted over like 1,200 aftershocks since the earthquake, and of course we also reported minor quakes in some not far away regions. Anything we should pay attention to? Whether there will be earthquake in some other regions because this is an earthquake belt, or what about the aftershocks? Is that normal or anything special we should probably look out for?
Yeah, so after magnitude 7 earthquake, we can typically expect tens of thousands of aftershocks, and those will gradually decay in the rate of those per day as time goes on. Now, typically, we have an average sort of rule of thumb law in seismology, and we say that on average, the largest aftershock size that we would expect is 1 unit of magnitude less than the main shock. So this earthquake was a magnitude 7, so therefore we can expect maybe a magnitude 6 earthquake. Now, I've looked at the aftershock catalogues, and I think there's only the largest I've seen so far has been about magnitude 5.1. So you could say maybe there's a chance of a larger aftershock, but the problem is many earthquakes do not obey these simple sort of rules. So it's something to be aware of, but hopefully organizations are forecasting the probability of that sort of slightly larger aftershock, but the probability of that will certainly decay off in time. Think about these more distant earthquakes. Obviously, the whole sort of Western China region is very tectonically active. There's lots of these active faults. So I would say these other earthquakes that you've mentioned elsewhere, sort of 500 or more kilometers away, they're likely to have occurred on faults that have already been stressed, but maybe the ground shaking from this earthquake, this magnitude 7 earthquake, might have triggered those faults to release those earthquakes. So it might have brought them slightly closer to happening, although they were probably going to happen at some point anyway. We wouldn't call those aftershocks, but sort of this distant triggering of earthquakes along more distant faults can sometimes be seen after large earthquakes.
All right. And Professor Fan, we know that your team has done research on the potential landslide that could be triggered by the earthquake. Tell us, you mentioned that earlier. What about more about that? What's your conclusion?
Yes, thank you for your interest in our work. Yes, we have actually developed an AI-based model for predicting earthquake-triggered landslides based on historical data from about 49 historical earthquakes globally. So this model, basically what the model can do is it can help us quickly predict the spatial distribution of earthquake-triggered landslides, and it can provide results very quickly in a few minutes after earthquake. So for this Dingri earthquake, my team and our laboratory, we predicted possible landslides within 200 kilometers from the epicenter. And the results and our conclusion show a very low chance of large-scale landslides in the region. I think Stephen just mentioned the area actually on the plateau, so it's quite not really rugged terrain like in the other parts of the China, like in the margins of the Tibetan Plateau. So this is part of the reason why there are not so many large-scale landslides. And the other reason is the relatively high risk areas in the remote mountainous regions, which are actually far from the residential area. So the chance of direct damage to the people are quite low. And we also checked the latest satellite imagery after the earthquake and found no evidence of large landslides, which actually align very well with our model prediction results. Like I mentioned previously, however, there are no direct landslide damage, but there are dozens of small glacier lakes in the earthquake-affected area. So while there is no sign of immediately damage to these lakes, but rising temperature and snow melting may raising the risk in the future. So my suggestion is we need to pay attention, especially local authority need to pay attention to such kind of secondary geological hazards.
So Noel, we know that the survivors of the earthquake-hit area, have certainly gone through tough times. Could be loss of, family members. Of course, could be suffering directly for themselves. Anything we need to pay attention to during the process of recovery, of assistance, in addition to, of course, setting up the tent or rebuilding of their homes there?
So fundamentally, what's being taken away in events like this is a sense of safety, and all human beings need a sense of safety. So the sooner we can bring that sense in, the better. And it sounds like the response so far has been absolutely tremendous. And the fact of seeing people coming in with resources to help will be significant in terms of ameliorating the psychological trauma. Obviously, people will have responses to this event, which are perfectly normal, and they will have anxiety, fear, maybe some panic, maybe some depression, maybe issues around sleeping, and we're not sure whether that's because it's cold or because of psychological issues, issues around food, outlook on life. All these things are normal parts of processing tremendously frightening events, and we shouldn't turn them into necessarily problems. That's just what we do. With a community like this, I'm a mountaineer. I've been in mountains all my life. and I'm well acquainted with mountainous communities. And this type of community high up in the mountains, they know where they live, and the community resilience is quite strong. So if you were to have this type of event in, say, a major city where people don't have this response to a hostile environment already as part of their culture, you would be talking about something slightly different. So I'd expect in the local communities there to be quite a lot of cohesion, a lot of support, a lot of community spirit as well, which is a very strong resilience factor in these situations. One of my colleagues has already talked about the impact of newcomers to the region having to acclimatise. And I think often we forget the rescuers and the psychological and physiological impacts upon the rescuers. And one of the best ways of managing reducing the impact of long-term psychological distress is making sure that we're supporting the rescuers effectively. So what we know from research and previous experience is the frontline, the first responder professionals, if we give them support, they're more able to support the direct victims. And in this case, I think, as a mountaineer, I would say that, and also as psychologically informed, that things like oxygen deprivation will be a significant part of the cognitive functioning of the rescuers. Yes. And that really needs to be looked at as a practical issue, because it does take a couple of weeks to acclimatise to somewhere like 5,000 metres. It doesn't happen overnight. The body doesn't. And there are definite impacts upon cognitive functioning because of that oxygen starvation, and the psychological responses of the rescuers will be affected by that, not necessarily those that live in the area. And so the immediate thing is just really to try and, as much as possible, to project to the local community, we've got this, we're going to look after you, we're going to get through this, and empower them with knowledge. And I think our seismologist expert, Stephen, has pointed out there'll be aftershocks. And we need to tell people that's normal, because obviously they'll be activated.
Who should do the work?
And they think, oh, another one. Oh my God, here's another one. And if we give people that knowledge and empower them, so this is just the normal process, and all of these are just normal processes, and as much as possible, encourage people to understand that rather than reinforce their fear reactions.
Well, of course, thank you, Noel there. And some related question that meant lastly for Changhua, if you look at the media, there are, I guess, mostly for the lack of information or lack of knowledge about the region. Some media are questioning about the earthquake, saying that, the collapse of the house is, because they are already very old, very dilapidated. So they are questioning the effectiveness of the Chinese poverty alleviation. Changhua, what's your response to that?
Well, we are living in an age of misinformation and disinformation. So things like that probably to most people are not surprising anymore. There are many people out there, including media, mainstream media as well as social media, domestic, internationally, because they don't have adequate information and knowledge and the data. Somehow they would maybe capturing whatever sort of information or data, then extrapolating their story, forming their narrative, stuff like that. So that's pretty much, unfortunately, the norm of the day. And I think facts are facts, and we have to respect the facts. This is a really unfortunate situation that the people in that region are suffering from such a devastating earthquake disasters. They are bearing their losses and the costs there. And the government, the whole society are pretty much mobilizing all the resources possible to support and to help minimize the cost and the suffering there. I think that's pretty much the focus of the day, rather than being distracted by different sort of misinformation, different disinformation sort of stories out there. One thing I do want to emphasize there, we do need to learn from the lessons to see, yes, we are delivering impressive deployment of emergency response, but what's lacking, we do need to figure out.
Okay, with that, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app on YouTube. I'm Chengdu. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.